Welcome back to Schoolroom. In our today's video, we'll be studying Chapter 1 for History, Class 10th, that is, the Rise of Nationalism in Europe. So, before we begin, let me tell you what this chapter is about. In this chapter, we'll be studying that how nationalism emerged in Europe. Basically, this chapter will tell you that how the feeling of nationalism came up in Europeans, the people who lived in Europe. Okay, and it will tell you that what our nationalism actually means. So let's begin. So this chapter begins with that in 1848, Frederick Sorey. Now, who's the Frederick Sorey? He's a French artist. He prepared a series of 4 paintings, that is, the paintings which told about his dream, that how he visualized his world to be, that was democratic and social republic. What does this mean? This means that the world had democracy and everyone was free. It was full of social republics. There was no discrimination. Everyone had their rights, just like in a nation state. So he called them as democratic and social republics. Now Frederick visualized this painting as it's given in the book. So this was his painting. You have a bit of description below. The first print of series shows the people of Europe and America, men and women of all ages and social classes, marching in a long train and offering homage to the Statue of Liberty as they pass by. So in this first painting, this is one painting given here. So it shows men and women of all ages, those who are queued up in a line and they are passing by the Statue of Liberty. And as they pass by this Statue of Liberty, this shows that they are getting liberal. They are getting freedom. And this personified, this Statue of Liberty is a female figure which is being personified as freedom here. And the torch of enlightenment she carries in one hand. And she also carries a charter. So as you can see here, this is the torch of enlightenment here. And this is the charter which she carries, right of men and others. And on the ground there are, you can see the papers. So these are the papers of the demolition of monarchy there. So Sorey visualized as an utopian vision here. Utopian is the vision, like what we say, a society that is so much idealistic that is unlikely to exist. So as you can see here, we have the meaning of utopian as well. In Sorey's utopian vision, the people of the world are grouped as distinct nations identified through their flags and national costumes. So as you can see, each and every person has a national costume, as a flag, so they are identified by this. This shows that they are of one nation. Leading the procession way past of the Statue of Liberty are the United States and Switzerland, which by this time were already nation states. So here, Frederick showed that US and Switzerland are already free as they had passed by the Statue of Liberty, and rest of the nations are on their way to become nation states. France, identifiable by the revolutionary tricolor, has just reached the statue. She is followed by the people of Germany wearing the black, red and gold flag. Interestingly, at the time when Sorey created this image, the German people did not yet exist as a united nation. So when Frederick made this such an image, the German people were not like a nation state, but still he made this to show that they are on the way to be a nation state. Then the flag they carry is an expression of liberal hopes in 1848 to unify the numerous German-speaking principalities into a nation state under a democratic constitution. Following the German people are people of Austria, the Kingdom of Two Sicilies, Lombardy, Poland, England, Ireland, Hungary, and Russia. So this is a long chain, and I think you don't need to remember this. It's a bit of kind of obvious. From the heaven above, Christ, saints and angels gaze upon the scene. They have been used by the artist to symbolize fraternity among the nations of the world. So here, as you can see, Jesus Christ is there, angels are there. So these are being used to describe the fraternity among the nations. This chapter will deal with many of the issues visualized by Sore in figure 1. During the 19th century, nationalism emerged as a force which brought about sweeping changes in the political and mental world of Europe. The end result of these changes was the emergence of nation-state in place of multinational dynastic empires of Europe. So this chapter will basically deal with all those things which Sore imagined to be there. And it will also tell how nationalism emerged and how it bring up revolution in many parts of the Europe, and how the end results, that is the nation states, were put into place instead of the multinational dynastic empires of Europe. So let me tell you what nation states are basically. You can just note down these points, they'll be helpful. So modern state in which is centralized power rules the whole state. That's a modern state. Now there are some features of nation states. See, sense of common identity. So as you can see here, the concept and practices of modern state in which centralized power exercised sovereign control over a clearly defined territory have been developing over a long period of time in Europe. So the sense people were getting from inside that it should be a nation state, but they were not termed as a nation state. They didn't had like a correct meaning for that, but still there was a sense that modern state were there. This means that a central power, a central authority ruled over whole state, and it had clearly defined territory. That is, it knew its boundaries of its territory, it knew how much area it has under its rule. That was developing during a long time in Europe, but a nation state was one in which, so modern state is a bit conceptual practice, like it only has a characteristic that it has definite territories, but it wasn't actually a nation state. A nation state is one which has people which have a common identity, including the ruler who is ruling over there, and the people have a sense of common identity, and they share history or descent. Like we say now, our ancestors, so they should have a common identity. Like if we say, for example, in India we have a common identity that we all are Indians. Number one. Then second one is that we all have the common descent, that we were earlier ruled by Britishers and then we got independence in 1947. So that's kind of a common shared interest or a shared common identity. So we have a sense of common identity. Number 1 point for the nation state. Then the second point is shared history. As I told you, we should have the shared history. We should have the same history, including our ruler and the people should follow the same history. Then struggle. We knew that struggle, that it was all like this way the nation state was formed. And the third point is defined territory. So the point of modern state is included in the nation states. There's a defined territory are there, defined population. Obviously, when you have a defined territory, you have a defined population, and they have their own constitution under which they are being ruled. So there are basically one, sense of common identity, 2, shared history and struggle, 3, defined territory, defined population, own constitution. So there are basically 5 points to remember about a nation state. Okay, Now, why I'm telling you about a nation state? Because earlier, what used to happen was the people, the ruler used to fight, and then he won a specific territory, and then he used to combine it with its rest of the territories. So the people there in the one particular territory were all mixed up. They didn't had a shared culture. Even like for example, the ruler is Russian and the people are French over there. So they didn't had a shared history. Also, they didn't had defined territory, because next day the ruler went to war again and he included one more place. So no defined territory, no defined population. So thus nation state was important. Now let's talk about the French Revolution and the idea of nation. So the very first idea of nation state was emerged in France only through the French Revolution. So here this is the first clear expression of nationalism came with the French Revolution in 1789. So the first clear expression that we should have nation states was brought by the French Revolution, as you might have studied in 9th class. French Revolution, which occurred in 1789. So this is to be remembered. The year France, as you would remember, was a full-fledged territorial state in 1789 under the rule of absolute monarch. So what I think you might be remembering, it was ruled by a monarch under an absolute monarchy, and its ruler was then forced to flee, and all that happened during the French Revolution. So political and constitutional changes that came in the wake of French Revolution led to the transfer of sovereignty from monarchy to the body of French citizens. And you might have remembered that the people there struggled a lot. They fought, they revoluted, they did revolutions there, revolted against the monarchy, and finally they were able to form a kind of constitution for their own state, and they got sovereignty, that is the freedom. So what all they did to do this? From the very beginning, the French revolutionaries introduced various measures and practices that could create a sense of collective identity amongst the French people. The ideas of le patrie, the fatherland, le citoyen, emphasize the notion of united community enjoying equal rights under the constitution. So, let me tell you before I teach this, you can just mark it as a question for you. That is, the French revolutionaries introduced various measures and practices to create a sense of collectiveness among the people. See, everyone doesn't feel the same. It is the practices, it is the shared descent which people realize and get the sense that they are collective and they are own, like one family kind of thing. So it was some measures which were introduced to make the French people feel that collectiveness among themselves. So that was the idea of le patrie, the fatherland. So number 1 point, you can just mark it as a question and you can just write it over here if you want to, that what steps were taken by the French revolutionaries to ensure the sense of collective identity among the citizens. So what if you don't want to write it, you can just mark here, like you can add what measures. So you just need to cut introduce various from the second line and write here what measures and practices that could create a sense of collective identity among French people were introduced. You have to add were introduced and a question mark, that's it. And then from the next line, from the very first that line, the idea of le patrie, the answer is starting. So first point is the idea of le patrie, that is the fatherland. They are talking about the land, the country, okay, and the les citoyens, the citizens. So they are talking about the land and its citizens. Emphasize the notion of united community enjoying equal rights in the constitution. So what this point basically means is they emphasized, they put and stressed over this notion that a whole community, that is its citizens, enjoying equal rights under a constitution on their own fatherland, where their ancestors were born, where they shared a common descent. So number 1 point is this. Then a new French flag, the tricolour, was chosen to replace the former royal standards. So the second point is a new French flag, a new tricolour flag was chosen to replace the royal standard flag. So the royal flag was there, it was replaced by a new tricolour flag. Okay. Then third point is the States General was elected by the body of active citizens and renamed the National Assembly. So they elected as States Generals. Now how they elected? By the body of active citizens. I think you might have been knowing active citizens were the people who were men above, I guess, 25, and the people who were paying tax. So that's what the active citizens included. So the States General were elected by the body of active citizens, and this was renamed as the National Assembly. So that's the third point of yours. Then new hymns were consumed, oaths taken, and martyrs commemorated, all in the name of nation. So they composed new hymns, like new poems. They took oaths and they remembered their martyrs. Martyrs means shaheed, people who died for their nation. So this all was done to create a sense of collectiveness among the people. Like, they'll also feel that we have a common descent. Then a centralized administrative system was put in place, and it formulated uniform laws for all its citizens within its territory. Now what does that mean? Like say a constitution was put in place basically, which formulated its role all over the citizens who were there in the territory or the boundaries of the country. Then internal customer duties and dues were abolished, very simple, and a uniform system of weights and measure was introduced. Now this uniform system of weights and measure, see, this line you will get on to the next page of this chapter, and while reading that you will get to know what was there, why they needed to introduce a uniform system of weights and measure. Okay. Then regional dialects were discouraged, and French, as it was spoken and written in Paris, became the common language of the nation. So here we have basically 7 points. You can mark them, and this can be a 5-mark question for you. Okay. The next is the revolutionaries further declared that it was the mission and the destiny of French nation to liberate the people of Europe from despotism. In other words, to help other people of Europe to become nation states. And then revolutionaries declared that it was the mission and the destiny of French nation that it should free all other nations as well and help them to become nation states. With the news of events in France reached the different countries of Europe, students and other members of educated middle class began setting up Jacobin clubs. See, when it was known by every person there that France is doing this and this, so other people of the rest of the Europe started setting up Jacobin clubs, as you might have studied in the French Revolution last year. Jacobin clubs were the societies where they discussed about everything, kind of like. So they were started. The people started setting up Jacobin clubs over there. Their activities and campaigns prepared the way for the French armies, which moved into Holland, Belgium, Switzerland, and many of the Italy in 1790s. With the outbreak of Revolutionary War, the French armies began to carry the idea of nationalism abroad. Now, by setting up Jacobin clubs and campaigning regarding the revolution, French armies were able to move into Holland, Belgium, and many parts of the Italy there, and they led to the revolution. And they carried that idea of nationalism as broad as well. So now you got the thing, how this nationalism was brought into place. Then we have, this is the last topic which I am going to discuss for today's video, that is the Napoleonic Code. And then from this page, the making of nationalism, we'll study in the next video. Okay, so this is within the wide swathe of territory that came under his control. Napoleon set up about introducing many of the reforms that he had already introduced in France. So now, as French army was moving all over, so Napoleon was able to conquer rest of the Europe as well. And what all measures he had introduced in France, he started introducing all those measures in other parts of the Europe as well. Though Napoleon had destroyed the democracy, but he has initiated some administrative revolutionary principles over there, which were really helpful. Like, see, the one was like the Civil Code of 1804. So you need to mark this. This can be a question. Write a short note on the Civil Code of 1804, also known as the Napoleonic Code. Okay. So it can be like Napoleonic Code as well, or the Civil Code of 1804. So two names. Now what was this? This was a kind of a rule initiated by Napoleon under his rule, which did away all the privileges based on birth, established equality before law, and secured the right to property. See, the clergy, all these estates, the upper two estates were like abolished kind of. See, all the privileges were taken away from them. Everyone was equal before the law. Also, the right to property was secured. This code was exported to regions under French control, as I told you earlier also. Then Napoleon simplified the administrative system. He abolished feudal system and freed peasants from serfdom and manorial dues. Napoleon freed people, the third estate, from the manorial dues, that is the tax they paid, all that they were giving to the upper estates. So they were just freed from them. Also serfdom, that is they used to do kind of labor for the upper two estates. So this was also abolished. Then guild restrictions were removed. And what is guild system? Restrictions, these are the restrictions onto the businessmen. Transport and communication system were improved. Masons, artisans, and businessmen enjoyed the new freedom. So as transport system was improved, guild restrictions were removed, peasants, businessmen were very happy with it. Businessmen and small-scale producers of goods in particular began to realize that uniform laws, a standardized weights and measure, and a common national currency would facilitate the movement and exchange of goods and capital from one region to another. However, in the area conquered, the reaction of local population to French rule were mixed. See, businessmen and the people there who were like businessmen, small-scale producers, they realized that all these various measures that were introduced, like standard wage system and common national currency, all this would facilitate them. It will help them to make their business more easier. But in other parts, or those all were conquered, there was some mixed feelings. Initially, in places such as Holland and Switzerland, as well as certain cities like Brussels, Mainz, Milan, Warsaw, the French armies were welcomed as the harbingers of liberty. Now, what is harbingers? It's the, what I can say is, the bringer. So you can just think the French armies, they were like welcomed by the other countries ki haan, they are going to free us. They are the harbingers of freedom. Okay. But the initial enthusiasm soon turned into hostility, that is anger. as it became clear that the new administrative arrangement did not go hand in hand. So, what happened? Earlier, the people in the rest of the Europe thought that the French army is helping them, it's getting freedom for all. But all this soon turned into anger, hostility of the other people. Now, how? Due to the increased taxation over here. So, this can be a 3-mark question. The question can be, how did the harbingers of liberty or the French army soon became into hostility of the people? Okay, so this is the reason: increased taxation, censorship, forced conscription into the armies. All these seem to outweigh the advantages of the administrative changes. So, tax were introduced, it was increased, so the people had to pay more in tax. Censorship, anyone cannot publish anything like that. They had censorship on that. And forced conscription into army, that is recruitment into armies forcefully. You have to get into the armies. That was forced on the people, just to make their army big so that they can conquer rest of the Europe as well. So that was all about the French Revolution. Not the French Revolution, but what all they did, how did they emerge the sense of nationalism among the French people, and then the Napoleonic Code, and then we studied about the French army, how they brought about nationalism in other parts of the Europe as well. So I hope you understood this topic, and if you, then do tell me in the comment sections below, and don't forget to like if you learned through this. Till then, bye bye.